The rain came down in sheets, blurring the line between road and sky. The highway stretched endlessly into the black void, headlights struggling to cut through the storm. For Sarah, it was just another late-night drive, another attempt to outrun her past. She had been running for years, but this time she would learn that some things cannot be escaped. Especially when the man you invite into your car knows everything about you, even the things you've buried so deep you forgot they were there. This is her story. The night she met the man with no eyes. The highway was desolate, stretching endlessly under the storm's relentless assault. Sarah tightened her grip on the steering wheel, her knuckles pale against the flickering dashboard lights. It was 1:17 a.m. She had checked the time 5 times in the past 10 minutes, but it was always the same, far too late to be on the road yet too early to feel safe. Her worn-out sedan hummed against the asphalt, the rhythmic thuds of raindrops on the windshield almost lulling her into a trance. Crackling voice of the radio DJ had given up hours ago. Now it was just static, broken occasionally by the deep growl of thunder. She liked it that way. Silence was better than her thoughts. She was running. She had always been running. From her past, from the mistakes that clung to her like the dampness in the air. Tonight was no different. Another town, another gas station clerk who glanced at her with suspicion, another cup of watery coffee to fuel her escape. Her headlights cut through the mist, illuminating a shadow up ahead. A man, standing by the roadside. He was drenched, his dark coat heavy with rain, a hood pulled low over his face. He didn't wave, didn't step into the road. He simply stood, still as a statue, facing the direction she was driving. Sarah felt her foot hover over the brake. Logic told her to keep driving. What kind of woman picks up a stranger at this hour? But something about him. He looked harmless. Older, maybe in his 60s. Frail. Helpless against the storm. Her heart betrayed her mind. The tires hissed against the wet road as she slowed to a stop. She leaned over, unlocking the passenger door. "You need a ride?" The man turned his head slowly toward her voice. The hood obscured most of his face, but Sarah caught a glimpse of his mouth, thin, tight-lipped, like he hadn't smiled in years. "I'd be grateful," he said, his voice gentle, almost soothing. He slid into the seat beside her with deliberate care, his soaked clothes releasing the earthy scent of rain and decay. Sarah resumed driving, acutely aware of the weight beside her. For a few miles, neither spoke. The storm filled the silence. She felt a strange relief, like maybe this was the right thing to do. Like maybe helping someone else could drown out her own guilt for a while. Then he broke the silence. "You've been driving a long time, Sarah." Her hands stiffened on the wheel. She hadn't told him her name. Car seemed to close in on her. The air turned thick, oppressive. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She forced a laugh, trying to mask her fear. "Did we meet before?" The man's head turned toward her, slowly, as though his neck creaked with the effort. The hood slipped back slightly, revealing more of his face. His skin was pale, almost waxy, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. But it was his eyes, or rather the absence of them, that made her breath catch in her throat. Where his eyes should have been, there was nothing. Just smooth, unbroken skin stretched over empty sockets. Yet she felt his gaze on her. Piercing. All-seeing. "I see everything," he said softly. Sarah's knuckles whitened further. "What? What do you mean?" He tilted his head, listening. "I know you. I know what you've done. And I know what's waiting for you." Panic surged through her veins. This was wrong. This was insane. She gripped the steering wheel like it was her last tether to reality. "I think you should get out," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's a truck stop a few miles up." He didn't move. "I know about Emily," he whispered. Sarah froze. Her sister. The accident. The night that started it all. "No," she whispered back. "You don't. I know how you watched her drown. How you could have saved her, but you were too afraid. You let the water take her." His voice remained gentle, but his words cut like razors. And you've been running ever since. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. She couldn't breathe. Her vision blurred as the road twisted ahead. How? How could you know that? The man leaned in slightly, though he never raised his voice. I see more clearly than anyone with eyes ever could. Sarah slammed her foot on the brakes. Car skidded, tires screaming against the wet pavement. Her chest heaved as she turned to him. Get out. The man didn't flinch. He simply smiled, thin, knowing. You can't leave your fate behind, Sarah. She blinked, and for a split second it was as though the entire car shifted. She saw flashes, her sister's lifeless face beneath the water, the faces of those she had hurt while running from herself, and finally, her own face, pale and lifeless, slumped over a steering wheel. You're lying, she stammered. He shook his head slowly. The road ahead is already paved. You can delay it, but you can't change it. Death is patient. Sarah's breathing came in short gasps. She pushed the door open, ready to flee into the storm, but before she could, the man was gone. Passenger seat was empty. Dry. As if he had never been there. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She pressed trembling fingers to her temples, trying to steady herself. She looked down at the floor mat. There, in the damp fabric, written in what looked like ash, was a single word. Sarah sat in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. The word fate burned into her consciousness as vividly as the storm raged outside. Her shaking hands gripped the steering wheel as she fought against the overwhelming urge to flee. The memory of the man with no eyes, his soft, all-knowing voice, the weight of his revelation, haunted every fiber of her being. She stared out into the downpour, desperately searching for any sign of his presence, yet the passenger seat remained empty and the echo of his words lingered like a curse. For a few moments, Sarah considered calling for help. But the thought of speaking her secret aloud, of confessing the guilt and grief that had driven her to run for so long, paralyzed her. Instead, she sat motionless, her mind racing. Every detail of that encounter replayed in her head. His sorrowful expression, the unnerving absence of eyes where they should have been, and the final chilling message about Emily and the fate that awaited her. As the car idled at a red light near an abandoned rest area, the storm's relentless drumming provided a bleak, rhythmic accompaniment to her inner turmoil. Her breath came in shallow, ragged bursts. She recalled the cold emptiness of that word etched in ash, fate, and wondered if it was a mark of doom or a call to accept the consequences of a past she could never undo. Gathering every ounce of courage, Sarah finally decided that running from the truth had only deepened her wounds. The man's words, though horrifying, were a twisted form of salvation, a wake-up call urging her to confront the darkest corners of her past. With trembling resolve, she pulled off the highway and into a narrow, gravel-lined road that led to a long-forgotten diner on the outskirts of town. Its neon sign flickered weakly, as if struggling to fight back against the storm, and its windows were shrouded in condensation. The diner, with its worn-out booths and an air of faded nostalgia, offered a momentary refuge from the tempest outside and from the storm within her. Inside, the smell of stale coffee and decades-old memories mingled in the dim light. Sarah slid into a booth in the corner, her eyes fixed on a scuffed menu as if searching for answers in its faded print. The silence in the diner was punctuated by the occasional clink of cutlery and the low murmur of a few other stranded souls. As she sat there, the weight of the man's revelations bore down on her. How could he possibly know her secret? And what did it mean when he said she had watched Emily drown? Her sister's tragic accident, a wound that had never truly healed, had always been the source of her deepest guilt and self-loathing. Unable to bear the silence any longer, Sarah reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her cell phone. Her finger hovered over the dial pad, but then she hesitated. Calling someone might mean facing the past head-on, accepting the consequences of the secret she had kept locked away for so long. Instead, she opened a small, worn notebook that she had kept hidden, a private journal where she had documented every regret, every sorrow. Flipping through its pages, she found a single line written in hurried ink. "I can't outrun fate forever." The words struck her like a thunderbolt, and in that moment she realized that the man with no eyes was not an apparition of doom, but a mirror reflecting the inevitable truth. She had to come to terms with her own responsibility. In the quiet hum of the diner, with rain tapping a mournful rhythm on the roof, Sarah began to write. She wrote about Emily, about the night of the accident, and the moments of indecision that had led her to make choices she now regretted. Each word was a release, a small act of defiance against the weight of her guilt. Sighed, the storm gradually softened to a steady drizzle, as if nature itself was allowing her a chance to exhale. The hours slipped by, and with every confession inked on the page, the terror that had gripped her began to loosen its hold. Sarah's tears, once a sign of unbearable grief, turned into a quiet acknowledgement of truth. In the gentle solitude of that forgotten diner, she realized that the man with no eyes had forced her to face the one secret that could no longer be hidden. Fate, it seemed, wasn't a sentence, it was an invitation to choose a different path, one where she could seek forgiveness and perhaps even redemption. As the first light of dawn crept through the grimy windows, Sarah closed her journal. The man's eerie prophecy still echoed in her mind, but now it was tempered by a newfound determination. With trembling hands, she left the diner and stepped back into the drizzle. Whatever fate had in store, she was ready to confront it, no longer as a fugitive haunted by the past, but as a woman prepared to rewrite her destiny. In the hazy light of early morning, Sarah felt the weight of her newfound resolve. The night in the diner had stripped away layers of guilt and denial, revealing raw truths that she could no longer ignore. With each step away from that small haven, the road ahead seemed less like an escape route and more like a journey toward reckoning, a chance to rebuild the fragments of her shattered life. The rain had softened into a steady drizzle as she drove along winding country roads. The sky, streaked with the pale blush of dawn, felt symbolic, a promise that even after the darkest night there was always a hint of new light. Sarah's thoughts churned relentlessly. She replayed the man with no eyes in her memory, his cryptic words echoing like a dirge. "You can't leave your fate behind, Sarah." But now, rather than cowering under that chilling prophecy, she clung to it as a challenge. Her car's headlights illuminated a narrow road leading to a small town she hadn't visited since before the accident. The town was unremarkable at first glance, a scattering of aging storefronts and modest homes, with a church steeple reaching toward the sky like a silent sentinel. Yet, as she navigated the familiar streets, memories surged up unexpectedly. She remembered childhood summers spent there, the bittersweet farewell to a simpler time, and a time before secrets became a burden too heavy to bear. At the town's center, Sarah parked her car near an old community center. Its faded brick facade and peeling paint whispered of stories long past, but today it beckoned her like a sanctuary for souls in need of healing. She stepped out, the cool morning air filling her lungs with a sense of cautious hope. A small crowd had gathered, perhaps for a morning market or a community gathering, and their faces held an unspoken solidarity, people who, like her, carried scars that time alone could not erase. Determined to find answers, Sarah sought out the town's elder, a kindly woman named Martha, known for her wisdom and gentle spirit. Martha had always been someone who understood the unspoken struggles of life, and Sarah hoped that in her quiet way the elder might offer guidance. Over steaming cups of tea in the modest warmth of Martha's parlor, Sarah began to share fragments of her story, her regret over Emily, the haunting presence of the hitchhiker, and the unnerving prophecy that had led her here. Martha listened intently, her eyes soft with empathy. "Sometimes, dear, our fate is not something imposed upon us by some malevolent force," she said slowly, stirring her tea. "It's the sum of our choices, our mistakes, and ultimately our courage to change. The man you saw, no eyes, yet seeing all, may be a symbol of the truth you've been denying. Perhaps he is urging you not to hide in fear, but to confront what lies within." Those words resonated deeply with Sarah. In that moment, she recognized that the eerie hitchhiker was not merely a harbinger of doom, but a catalyst for change, a mirror reflecting the parts of her soul that she had long tried to escape. The road to redemption, she realized, was fraught with painful revelations, yet it was also paved with opportunities for forgiveness and self-acceptance. Leaving Martha's home with a newfound sense of clarity, Sarah returned to her car. The town's quiet determination had kindled in her a resolve to face her past head-on. Whether redemption or ruin lay ahead, she knew that only by embracing the truth of her fate could she begin to heal. As she merged back onto the winding road, the drizzle gave way to a soft, promising light, and with it, a tentative step toward a future where her secrets no longer defined her but rather guided her to a life of meaning and perhaps ultimate redemption. Would you like to continue further into Sarah's journey? With the early light of a hopeful dawn still lingering in her heart, Sarah pressed forward into the unknown. The town's quiet determination had ignited a spark within her, a resolve to finally face the ghosts of her past and the spectral visitor who had haunted her nights. The road ahead, lined with ancient trees and weathered stone walls, whispered of secrets and buried memories waiting to be unearthed. For weeks now, Sarah had immersed herself in the small town's rhythm. By day, she helped at the community center, where neighbors gathered to rebuild, support one another, and mend the fractures in their lives. In the evenings, she ventured out into the solitude of quiet country roads, searching for fragments of the past that might explain the uncanny presence of the man with no eyes. Every winding turn and every deserted stretch of pavement seemed to murmur both caution and promise. One overcast afternoon, as autumn's chill crept into the bones of the land, Sarah found herself drawn to the old bridge on the outskirts of town, a bridge that spanned a slow, murmuring river. The structure, cloaked in ivy and worn by time, held memories of lost conversations and tearful goodbyes. Here, she hoped, lay the key to unraveling the enigma of her haunting encounter. Sitting on the cold, moss-covered railing, she allowed her thoughts to flow. The steady rhythm of the river reminded her of the steady ticking of fate, an inexorable march toward destiny. It was there, amidst the gentle rush of water and whisper of wind, that a figure emerged from the mists, a silhouette that grew clearer with every step. Sarah's heart pounded as she recognized the unmistakable aura of the man who had once sat silently in her car. His presence was quiet yet undeniable. Though his eyes were absent, his face was calm, almost compassionate, as if he carried the weight of 1,000 untold sorrows. "You've come," he said softly, his voice melding with the rustling leaves. There was no malice, only a profound sadness that resonated deep within her. "How do you know me?" Sarah managed to ask, her voice trembling between fear and a desperate yearning for understanding. He paused, as though considering his next words. "I know you because I'm the keeper of your unspoken truths, the silent witness to your darkest moments and the hope that lies buried beneath regret. I see the pain that you have carried, the choices that have haunted you, and the love you once lost." His tone was neither accusing nor comforting. It was simply the raw, unfiltered reflection of her soul. For the first time, Sarah did not recoil or try to escape. Instead, she listened. Under the shadow of the ancient bridge, amidst the swirling mists of memory, she found herself pouring out her story, the night she let fear dictate her actions, the deep-rooted guilt over Emily's untimely fate, and the endless nights of remorse that had kept her running. With every word spoken into the quiet afternoon, the invisible barrier between her present and her past began to crumble. The man's presence was not to torment her, but to guide her through the labyrinth of her own regret. "Redemption," he murmured, "is not a destination but the journey of accepting every fragment of your past, the light and the darkness. Only when you embrace your scars can you truly see the path forward." As the sky shifted in hue, blending the melancholy of dusk with the hope of another day, Sarah realized that the man with no eyes was less a specter of doom and more a mirror reflecting the truth she had long evaded. In that pivotal moment, she resolved to no longer flee from her own shadow. Instead, she would confront the regrets that had defined her, learn from them, and gradually rebuild her sense of self. The bridge, the river, and the silent witness bore testament to the transformative power of truth. With a final, resolute glance at the mysterious figure, Sarah whispered, "I'm ready." The mist around them seemed to part as if in silent approval. In embracing the shadows, she began to step toward a future where forgiveness, both of herself and of the past, would guide her every step. Would you like to continue further into Sarah's evolving journey? In the quiet aftermath of that transformative encounter on the old bridge, Sarah felt as though a long-held burden was finally lifting from her shoulders. The mist had retreated, leaving behind a landscape that was at once familiar and new, a world waiting to be seen through unclouded eyes. With every step she took along the riverbank, she sensed that the path before her was not one of endless regret, but rather an invitation to embrace a future defined by hope and renewal. Over the following days, Sarah immersed herself in the rhythm of the town. she resumed her work at the community center with a newfound vigor, dedicating herself to helping others heal from their own hidden sorrows. In the quiet hours of the early morning, she would visit the river, now a symbol of life's ceaseless flow, and sit on the weathered steps of the old bridge. There, she reflected on the man with no eyes, the silent witness of her darkest moments who had become an unlikely guide toward inner truth. The memory of that enigmatic figure lingered in her mind, not as a specter of doom, but as a gentle reminder of the transformative power of facing one's past. It was as if his message had woven itself into the very fabric of her being, that every mistake, every regret, held within it the seed of redemption. Slowly, Sarah began to mend the shattered pieces of her identity. She reached out to those she had once pushed away, including her estranged friends and even distant relatives who had long worried about her isolation. Conversations that were once stifled by guilt and silence blossomed into heartfelt exchanges. With each connection reestablished, Sarah felt a quiet strength build inside her, a resolve to live authentically and honor the lessons learned from her darkest hours. One crisp afternoon, as autumn was slowly giving way to winter, Sarah found herself standing before a community mural that had recently been unveiled in the town square. The mural depicted a vibrant tapestry of life, figures intertwined in moments of sorrow and joy, darkness intermingling with light. At its center, a pair of eyes, warm, compassionate, and full of understanding, seemed to gaze out, inviting every passerby to confront their inner truth. In that moment, Sarah recognized that the eyes did not belong to any single person, but rather represented the collective vision of a community that had learned to see beyond surface appearances. It was a silent celebration of resilience and the power of shared experience. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to feel an inner peace that she had never known before. The pain of her past did not vanish entirely, but it transformed into a gentle, enduring presence, a reminder of the choices that had led her to this place of self-acceptance. On quiet evenings, she would sit by her window and watch the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of gold and lavender, and whisper a quiet thank you to the mysterious man who had, in his own enigmatic way, helped her see clearly for the first time in years. In embracing her shadows, Sarah discovered that fate was not a fixed, unyielding destiny but a dynamic journey, a series of choices that could lead either to ruin or to redemption. With every step forward, she was writing a new chapter in her life, one marked not by regret but by hope, not by fear but by the courage to love and to live fully. Standing on the threshold of this new horizon, Sarah knew that her journey was far from over. Yet now, she faced the future with open eyes and an open heart, a living testament to the truth that even the darkest encounters can illuminate the way to a brighter tomorrow. In the soft glow of twilight, as the last embers of the day faded into a quiet night, Sarah stood at the edge of a familiar riverbank. The gentle ripple of water reflected not only the light of 100 distant stars, but also the journey of a woman who had once been haunted by her own regrets. Now, the burdens that had weighed so heavily on her heart had transformed into a deep, enduring wisdom. In that final reflective moment, Sarah recalled the enigmatic man with no eyes, the silent messenger who had appeared at the crossroads of her despair and ignited the spark of redemption. His presence, once terrifying and shrouded in mystery, had become a symbol of truth and renewal. It was as though he had vanished into the mist, leaving behind an indelible imprint on her soul that would guide her through every dark night and every dawning morning. As the cool night air embraced her, Sarah understood that fate was not a rigid decree, but a canvas upon which she could paint a future of her own choosing. Every decision, every act of courage had rewritten her story. The shadows of her past, which had once loomed like insurmountable barriers, were now integrated into a mosaic of experiences that gave her life depth and meaning. With a final contented sigh, she closed her eyes, imagining the face of the man with no eyes, not as a figure of dread, but as a benevolent guardian who had led her toward forgiveness, both of herself and of the past. In that silence, she felt an inexplicable connection to every soul that had ever wrestled with guilt and sorrow, and she vowed to honor their collective resilience by living with honesty, compassion, and hope. The night deepened, and as Sarah opened her eyes to the sparkling reflection of the starlit river, she saw within herself a quiet determination. The future was uncertain, and life's road would always hold twists and turns, but she was ready to face every moment with clarity, understanding, and a heart unburdened by what had once seemed insurmountable. In that serene epilogue of her journey, Sarah embraced the final vision, that even the most enigmatic encounters and the darkest secrets could serve as stepping stones toward a life filled with light. And so, under the watchful gaze of the heavens, she took her first confident step into tomorrow, ever grateful for the man who saw without eyes, yet revealed the most profound truths of all.